Silas Harrington used to believe loyalty had a price tag until the day his board applauded him, then quietly stole from him. So he vanished. No driver, no suit, no name, just a threadbare coat and a cardboard sign that read, "Need kindness, not cash." He knocked on penthouses and diners, watched smiles die when they saw his dirt-stained hands. Even people who once begged for his attention looked away. Then, on the coldest night, a poor girl named Seraphina Vale opened her crooked door and said, "I only have soup, but you'll be safe tonight." He stepped inside, unaware she would change everything. 3 days earlier, Silas had stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a kingdom he no longer recognized. The skyline glittered with buildings he owned, streets named after donations he had made, hospitals that bore his family name in bronze letters, and yet none of it felt real anymore. None of it felt like his. The board meeting had just ended. Everyone had smiled, everyone had clapped, everyone had praised his vision, his leadership, his brilliance, and every single one of them had been lying through their teeth. He had discovered it by accident, a chain of internal transactions hidden beneath layers of shell companies and falsified records. Someone had been siphoning funds from the emergency reserves for months, routing them through subsidiaries that existed only on paper. The digital signatures had been scrubbed, the access logs deliberately corrupted, the audit trails designed to lead nowhere. But Silas was not a man who built an empire by missing details. He had spent 3 sleepless nights tracing every breadcrumb, cross-referencing every anomaly. Until the pattern became undeniable, they all led to one name, Carter. Carter, who called him brother at every meeting. Carter, who had sworn loyalty when Silas gave him his first executive position 15 years ago. Carter, who had held Silas's hand at his father's funeral and promised to always have his back. Carter, who smiled the widest when the applause rang out, already calculating how to take everything Silas had built. The betrayal was not surprising. Silas had learned long ago that money attracted parasites. What wounded him, what kept him awake staring at spreadsheets while the city slept, was the realization that he could no longer distinguish the parasites from the people. Every handshake felt hollow. Every compliment tasted like poison. He looked around his empire and saw nothing but strangers wearing masks of loyalty, waiting for the moment he showed weakness so they could tear him apart. That night, alone in his penthouse surrounded by art he had never truly looked at, Silas poured himself a drink and remembered something from his childhood. He had been 12 years old, lost in an unfamiliar part of the city after wandering too far from home. His parents had been fighting again, and he had run until he could not hear their voices anymore. By the time he realized, he was lost. The sun was setting, and he did not recognize a single street. A stranger had found him crying on a corner, not a wealthy stranger. Just a man in work boots carrying a lunch pail, his face weathered by years of outdoor labor. The man had given him water from a dented thermos, pointed him toward the bus station, and refused to take a single dollar for his trouble. "You looked like you needed help," the man had said, his voice rough but kind. "That's enough reason." Silas had never forgotten that moment. Back then, he had been nobody. He had no name, no wealth, no power. His clothes were dirty from running, his face streaked with tears, and yet that stranger had treated him like a human being worth saving. He wondered if that kind of person still existed. He wondered if he would recognize them if he saw them. He wondered if he himself had ever been that person for anyone. The idea took root slowly, then consumed him entirely. He would not simply expose Carter through lawyers and boardroom warfare. That was too clean, too controlled. too much like the sterile transactions that had replaced actual human connection in his life. He would disappear. He would strip away every marker of his identity: the watches, the tailored suits, the black credit cards, the deference that followed him everywhere like a shadow, and walk among ordinary people as one of them. He would not ask for money. He would only ask for the smallest kindnesses: a glass of water, a warm meal, a place to rest, a moment of genuine human connection. He wanted to know, once and for all, whether goodness still existed in a world that had taught him to trust no one. Silas made his preparations with surgical precision. He transferred emergency authority to Henry, his most trusted legal advisor, under a confidential clause that would activate only if Silas remained unreachable for 72 hours. Henry argued against the plan, called it reckless, called it a midlife crisis wrapped in philosophical nonsense. Silas listened, acknowledged the risks, and proceeded anyway. He briefed Archie, his head of security, with explicit instructions: follow from a distance, intervene only if his life was in genuine danger, and never reveal his identity under any circumstances. Archie, a former military man who had saved Silas's life twice before, did not like the assignment, but he understood his employer well enough to know that arguing was futile once Silas made up his mind. Then Silas shed his skin. He removed his platinum watch, his signet ring, his wallet, his phone. He dressed in clothes purchased from a thrift store: faded jeans, a stained jacket, shoes with worn soles that let in the cold. He rubbed dirt into his hands, let his stubble grow uneven, practiced walking with shoulders slightly hunched. When he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. The man staring back had hollow cheeks and tired eyes, nothing like the portrait that hung in the company lobby. The transformation was complete. Silas Harrington, billionaire, ceased to exist. In his place stood a nameless man with nothing to offer and everything to learn. Meanwhile, Carter moved quickly. Within hours of Silas's disappearance, he had already begun spinning a narrative. Exhaustion, he told the other board members with practiced concern. His brow furrowed in what he imagined was worry. Silas has been under tremendous pressure. I fear for his mental state. Behind closed doors, he accelerated his acquisition of shares, greased the palms of journalists, and laid the groundwork to declare Silas unfit for leadership. Carter did not know where Silas had gone, but he knew opportunity when he saw it, and he intended to seize every advantage before his rival returned. Silas spent his first day on the streets learning what it meant to be invisible. The sensation was disorienting after decades of being noticed, accommodated, anticipated. He now moved through crowds without anyone acknowledging his existence. People looked through him as if he were made of glass. He approached a luxury apartment building where he had once attended a charity gala and asked the doorman for a glass of water. The man looked at him as though he were a stain on the marble floor, his lip curling with unconcealed disgust. "Move along," the doorman said. "We don't want your kind here." Silas opened his mouth to respond, then stopped himself. Your kind. He had become your kind. The realization was both humbling and infuriating. He tried a coffee shop next, offering to wash dishes in exchange for a warm drink. The manager laughed and said, "We don't hire people off the street. Try a shelter." She did not even pause in her work, as if the conversation required no more attention than swatting away a fly. He approached a woman on a park bench who was feeding pigeons and asked if she could spare any of the bread. She clutched her bag tighter, her eyes widening with fear, and walked away without a word. Silas watched her go, wondering what she saw when she looked at him. A threat, a nuisance, or simply nothing at all by afternoon. Silas had been refused 17 times. Not once had anyone asked if he was okay. Not once had anyone looked him in the eye long enough to see that he was still a person beneath the grime and the worn clothes. The cruelest moment came outside a restaurant where a group of young professionals were finishing an expensive lunch. One of them recorded him on her phone, laughing as she narrated, "Look at this guy pretending to be polite. Probably a scam artist." Her companions joined in, mocking his careful speech, his too clean posture, the way he said please, as if the word meant something. Within hours, the video had spread across the internet, and strangers were commenting that he deserved to starve for being too lazy to work. Others suggested he was faking homelessness to steal from real charity cases. One person wrote that society would be better off if people like him simply disappeared. Silas read those words on a public library computer, his hands trembling with a rage he had not felt in years. He had built hospitals. He had funded schools. He had written checks with more zeros than these people would earn in a lifetime. And now they judged him worthless because his clothes were dirty and his hands were empty. The second day brought worse humiliation. A wallet went missing near a shopping center, and the crowd immediately turned on Silas. "He did it!" someone shouted, pointing with righteous certainty. "Look at him, he's obviously a thief." A security guard grabbed him by the collar and shoved him against a wall while onlookers watched with satisfied expressions, as if justice were being served. No one asked for evidence. No one questioned the accusation. No one suggested waiting for the facts. Silas tried to explain calmly, but his composure only made them angrier. "He's faking it," they muttered. "Con artists always sound polite." They wanted him to grovel. He realized. They wanted him to confirm their assumptions about what a homeless person should be. He was released only when the real thief was caught on camera 2 hours later. But no one apologized. They simply dispersed, returning to their shopping and their conversations, leaving Silas alone with bruises on his shoulders and a profound understanding of what it meant to have no power. That night, he found a homeless encampment beneath an overpass and asked if he could share their fire. An older man with weathered hands and suspicious eyes looked him up and down before shaking his head. "We barely have enough for ourselves," the man said, not unkindly but firmly. "Find your own spot." Even the people with nothing were afraid of losing what little they had. Silas could not blame them. In their position, he might have done the same. Archie watched from a parked car 2 blocks away, his hand hovering over his phone. He had seen Silas negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, face down hostile boards with nothing but his voice and his nerve. He had never seen him like this, defeated, diminished, stripped of every defense. He sent a message to Henry. "He's pushing too far. This could break him." Henry's reply was immediate. "He needs to see this through. Stay close." Archie obeyed, but his jaw was tight with worry. By the 3rd night, Silas had stopped counting rejections. Rain began to fall, cold and relentless, and he found himself standing beneath the narrow awning of a stranger's porch, hoping for 10 minutes of shelter before moving on. The door opened, and a middle-aged woman peered out at him with undisguised hostility. "Get away from my house," she said, her hand already reaching for her phone. "Before I call the police." He stepped back into the rain without argument. There was nothing left to argue for. The city stretched around him, millions of people going about their lives, and not one of them had room for a stranger in need. Serafina Vale had worked a double shift at the diner, and her feet ached with every step as she walked home through the downpour. Her uniform was damp despite her umbrella, and her back throbbed from hours of carrying trays and smiling at customers who rarely smiled back. She stopped at a discount grocery store and carefully selected the cheapest vegetables, a wilted cabbage, some carrots past their prime, an onion with a soft spot she could cut away. She added a package of noodles and a small bag of bones for soup. The cashier barely looked at her as she counted her coins twice before paying, relieved that she would have just enough left over for part of the electricity bill. Her apartment was a cramped space in a building that should have been condemned years ago. The stairs groaned under her weight. The hallway smelled of mildew, and the locks were so old she could have picked them with a hairpin. The front door hung crooked on its hinges and required a firm shove to close. The roof leaked in 3 places, and she had learned to position buckets with the precision of a scientist predicting rainfall. But she kept the space clean. Her blankets were folded neatly on the narrow bed. The small kitchen was organized with careful efficiency. A notebook on the table tracked every penny she spent, every bill she owed, every hour she worked. Serafina had learned to survive on almost nothing, but she refused to let poverty make her bitter. That was the one thing she would not surrender. Her friend Vivian had stopped by earlier, warning her for the 100th time about being too trusting. Vivian worked at the same diner, earned the same miserable wages, lived in the same crumbling building. But where Serafina saw possibilities, Vivian saw only traps. "This world will eat you alive," Vivian had said, her voice sharp with experience. "Stop giving pieces of yourself to people who will never give anything back." Serafina had only smiled tiredly, too exhausted to argue. "I'm not kind because I expect rewards," she had replied. "I'm kind because it's the only thing that still feels like mine." Shortly after Vivian left, there was a knock at the door. Bernie, the building's landlord, stood in the hallway with his usual predatory smile. He was a heavy-set man who smelled of cheap cologne and cheaper beer, and he took visible pleasure in the power he held over his tenants. "Rent's due," he said, his voice slick with false courtesy. "You know I've been patient with you, sweetheart, but patience has limits." Serafina kept her expression neutral even as her stomach tightened. "I'll have it by Friday," she said. 2 more days." Bernie leaned against the door frame, letting his presence fill the space, letting her feel how small she was compared to him. "Friday," he repeated slowly, savoring the word. "You're lucky I like you. Don't make me regret it." The threat was clear. Bernie never had to make his threats explicit. That was part of his power. When he finally left, Serafina locked the door and pressed her back against it, breathing slowly until her hands stopped shaking. She heated a small portion of soup, ate it alone by the window, and watched the rain streak down the glass. The city lights blurred through the water, beautiful in a way that felt cruel. Then came another knock, softer this time, almost hesitant. Serafina approached the door cautiously, peering through the gap. A man stood in the hallway, soaking wet, shivering, his clothes torn and stained. His lips were pale, his hands trembling, but his eyes were clear, and his voice, when he spoke, was steady despite the cold. "I'm not asking for money," he said quietly. "I just need to be warm for a little while." Serafina did not open the door immediately. She assessed him the way a woman living alone learns to assess strangers, his posture, his hands, the distance to her kitchen where the heaviest pan hung within reach. She noted that he kept his distance, that he did not try to force his way in, that his voice held neither aggression nor manipulation. "Are you being chased?" she asked. "Is someone after you?" "No," he said simply. "I just have nowhere else to go." She made her decision. "You can come in," she said. "But you sleep on the chair. I lock my bedroom door. If you try anything, I will scream loud enough for the whole building to hear, and my neighbors may be poor, but they protect their own." Silas nodded and stepped inside. The apartment was smaller than his closet, but cleaner than he expected. A bucket caught water dripping from the ceiling with a rhythmic ping. The furniture was mismatched and worn, clearly salvaged from different eras and different sources. But there was warmth here, something he had not felt in longer than he could remember, something that had nothing to do with temperature. Serafina gave him a towel, a dry shirt that must have belonged to someone larger, and a bowl of soup. He noticed that she served herself less than she gave him, though she said nothing about it. The soup was simple broth and vegetables and noodles, but it was hot, and it was freely given, and that made it worth more than any meal he had eaten in years. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. She shrugged as if the question were absurd. "You're cold and wet. That's reason enough." She did not ask his name. She did not ask where he came from or what he had done to end up here. She simply told him to eat slowly so he would not make himself sick, then retreated to her room and locked the door as promised. Silas lay on the worn chair, listening to the rain and the rhythmic ping of water hitting the bucket. For the first time in years, he felt something loosen in his chest. Not gratitude. Exactly. Something deeper. Something like recognition. This woman had almost nothing, and she had given him shelter without expecting anything in return. She had treated him like a person, not a problem to be solved or ignored. He had found what he was looking for, and he had no idea what to do with it. The days that followed were unlike anything Silas had experienced. Serafina left early each morning for work, leaving a note on the table. "If you leave, lock the door. If you stay, don't touch my personal things." The instructions were practical, boundaried, utterly without sentimentality. He respected her more for them. He began to repay her in the only currency available to him. He fixed the crooked door hinge using tools he found in a drawer. He patched the worst of the roof leaks with materials scrounged from a nearby construction site. He cleaned the apartment, washed the dishes, swept the floors, tasks he had not performed himself in decades, tasks that his staff had always handled without him noticing. When Serafina returned and saw the door swinging smoothly, she looked at him with surprise that melted into something softer, something like recognition. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "You didn't have to let me stay," he replied. Vivian remained suspicious. She visited one evening, studying Silas with narrowed eyes and pointed questions. "Where did you work before? Why are you really here? How do I know you're not going to rob her the minute she trusts you?" Silas answered carefully, revealing nothing that would betray his identity. But Vivian was not satisfied. "I've seen men like you," she told Serafina privately, her voice low and urgent. "Polished manners, careful words. He's hiding something. People don't end up homeless by accident." Serafina did not argue. "Maybe he is hiding something," she said. "But I've been hungry and cold and desperate, and I remember what it felt like when no one cared. I can't become that person. Viv, I refuse." Slowly, in fragments, Silas learned Serafina's story, a childhood marked by lost parents who left too soon, a system that shuffled her from place to place until she aged out of its care, landlords who exploited her, employers who cheated her, strangers who dismissed her, and yet she had emerged without cruelty, without cynicism. "Bernie wants me to break," she said one night, her voice quiet but fierce. "He thinks if he pushes hard enough, I'll become like him, willing to hurt others just to survive. But if I become that, he wins, and I refuse to let him win." Silas felt something twist in his chest, guilt, sharp and undeniable. He was deceiving this woman who had given him everything she had. He was using her kindness as a data point in an experiment she had never consented to join. He wanted to tell her the truth, but Carter's people were already circling. If Silas revealed himself now, Serafina would become a target not just of gossip, but of genuine danger. Carter would use her to draw Silas out. Carter would destroy her without hesitation. So Silas stayed silent, hating himself a little more with each passing hour. Finn arrived in the neighborhood posing as a census worker, asking casual questions that were anything but casual. He was a man who had spent his career finding people who did not want to be found, and he was very good at his job. Serafina met him at the door with polite suspicion. "I don't know anything about anyone," she said flatly. "People here mind their own business." Finn noticed Silas standing in the kitchen, his posture too controlled for a homeless drifter, the way he held himself. The precision of his movements, everything spoke of a man accustomed to authority. But Serafina positioned herself between them, her small frame a barrier she had no business trying to be. "If you're looking for trouble," she said, "you'll need to look somewhere else." Finn retreated, but his instincts were screaming. He reported back to Carter. "I found something. The situation is complicated." Carter did not care about complications. He only cared about results. Bernie chose this moment to escalate. He arrived with threats of eviction, accusations of harboring an unregistered tenant, and demands for immediate payment. When Serafina refused to sign a document that would have legalized her own displacement, Bernie's smile turned vicious. "Stubborn little thing," he said, enjoying her discomfort. "We'll see how long that lasts." He cut her water that night. He promised the electricity would follow. Silas watched Serafina absorb each blow with quiet dignity, and something inside him finally broke. He could not stand by any longer. He stepped forward and spoke directly to Bernie. "You're exploiting a woman who has done nothing wrong." Bernie turned slowly, looking Silas up and down. "Who the hell are you to lecture me? Someone who recognizes a predator when he sees one." Bernie moved fast, shoving Silas hard against the wall. Silas did not fight back. He let himself fall. Let himself feel the impact, the pain of powerlessness that millions of people endured every day while men like Bernie laughed. Serafina rushed to help him up, her small hands steady on his shoulders. And Silas understood, in that moment, that he had finally found what he was looking for. Not a test subject, not data for an experiment, a teacher. Carter's attack came without warning. One morning, Serafina woke to find a crowd gathered outside her building, strangers with phones, journalists with microphones, neighbors pointing and whispering. A story had broken overnight. Poor woman, shelters mystery con man, is she accomplice or victim? The article painted Serafina as either a naive fool or a willing participant in fraud. Anonymous sources claimed she was hiding stolen money. Her face was everywhere, attached to accusations she could not defend against. Vivian tried to shield her from the cameras, but the crowd pressed closer. They shouted questions that were really accusations. "How much did he pay you? Where's the money hidden? Are you sleeping with him?" Serafina stood in the doorway of her own home, publicly humiliated for the crime of showing kindness to a stranger. Silas watched from inside, and his guilt became unbearable. His experiment, his selfish, arrogant experiment, had brought this storm down on an innocent woman. He had wanted to test humanity, and instead he had destroyed the one person who had passed his test. That night, Serafina finally confronted him. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were raw with exhaustion and betrayal. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Why are they coming after me because of you?" Silas could not lie anymore. He wiped the grime from his face, straightened his shoulders, and let the mask fall away. "My name is Silas," he said quietly. "Silas Harrington." The name meant nothing to her at first. Then recognition flickered, headlines half-remembered, photographs glimpsed in passing. "The billionaire," she whispered. "The one who disappeared." "Yes." Her expression shifted through shock, disbelief, and finally something that looked like grief. Not grief for him, grief for herself, for what she had believed, for what she had given. "So, I was just a test, she said, her voice hollow. An experiment. You wanted to see if poor people could be good, and I was convenient. Serafina, that's not... You came into my home, she continued, her voice rising. I gave you my food. I trusted you. And the whole time, you were studying me like a specimen. Silas had no defense. Everything she said was true. I treated you like a human being, Serafina said, and her voice broke on the words. I did that before I knew who you were, but you never gave me the same respect. She opened the door and stood beside it, waiting. Please leave, she said. I don't want your money. I don't want your apology. I just want to be left alone. Silas walked out into the cold, and for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to lose something that could not be bought back. But Silas Harrington had not built an empire by accepting defeat. He contacted Henry and set the plan in motion. Within 48 hours, they had assembled everything: financial records proving Carter's embezzlement, communications showing his coordination of the smear campaign against Serafina, testimony from Audrey detailing how the company's charitable funds had been systematically looted to line Carter's pockets. Finn, consumed by guilt over his role in targeting Serafina, provided the final piece, a recording of Carter explicitly ordering her destruction. The press conference was held in the company's main auditorium. Cameras lined every wall. Carter sat in the front row, still confident, still smiling his practiced smile. Silas took the podium and did something no one expected. He apologized. I made a mistake, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. I lost faith in humanity and in my arrogance. I decided to test it. I disguised myself as someone with nothing and asked for basic kindness. Most people failed, but one woman, a woman named Serafina Vale, opened her door to a stranger in the rain and gave him everything she had. He paused, letting the words settle. My experiment brought suffering to an innocent person. That is my responsibility, and I accept it fully. But what happened next, the smear campaign, the harassment, the deliberate destruction of an innocent woman's reputation, that is Carter's doing. He presented the evidence methodically, irrefutably. The fraudulent transactions, the stolen funds, the deliberate campaign to destroy a woman whose only crime was compassion. Carter's smile finally cracked. By the end of the presentation, federal investigators were already moving toward him. You think you're the hero? Carter spat as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. You used her too. Silas met his eyes without flinching. Yes, he said. The difference is, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it right. Serafina did not watch the press conference. She heard about it later, from Vivian, who had recorded the whole thing. He took responsibility, Vivian said grudgingly. I'll give him that. It doesn't change what he did, Serafina replied. But something had shifted, and they both knew it. Silas did not come to her with gifts or grand gestures. He came with a simple question. What do you need? I don't need anything from you, she said. I know, he replied. But if I can help others people in situations like yours, I want to do it the right way. Not charity that makes people feel small. Real opportunity. Real respect. And I want your advice, because you understand what I never will. Serafina studied him for a long moment. The arrogance was still there, buried deep, but something else had grown alongside it. Humility. Maybe, or at least the beginning of it. If you want my help, she said finally, then you follow my rules. No using people as props. No turning poverty into a performance. And you never, ever make someone feel like they owe you for being decent. Agreed, he said. The program they built together was unlike anything Silas had created before. Job training that treated participants as professionals, healthcare that preserved dignity, legal aid to fight predatory landlords like Bernie, who was himself eventually investigated for years of intimidation, illegal evictions, and utility shutoffs. Serafina did not attend his hearing, but she signed the complaint that brought him down. Months passed. The scandal faded. Carter awaited trial. Silas returned to his company, changed in ways his employees could not quite articulate. One evening, he found himself standing outside Serafina's building again. The door had been replaced a proper door now, one that closed smoothly on new hinges. He knocked. She opened it and looked at him with an expression he could not read.
"I fixed the roof," she said. "Properly this time. Your patch was terrible." "I never claimed to be a handyman." A ghost of a smile crossed her face. "No, you claimed to be a lot of other things instead." They stood in silence for a moment. "I'm not going to forgive you overnight," she said. "Maybe not ever. What you did was wrong." "I know. But you're trying," she continued. "And that's more than most people manage." She stepped aside, and the door swung open. "I made soup," she said, "if you're hungry." Silas stepped inside, not as a billionaire playing a role, but as a man still learning what it meant to be human.
Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the city in white, a blank page waiting to be written.